So what would be your top tips for the bleep test or to get yourself ready for it? And I know you do a course on this, don't you, as well? You do a
Yeah,
you've got, in fact, there's one on the 6 week shred, isn't there?
yeah,
There's actually a session on it, yeah.
yeah. So, well, the bleep test is probably one of those things whereby it's actually a mental test, I think, as much as a physical test, because we've got people who can run a half marathon, but then they'll go to the other bleep test and they get inside their own head because they've heard the bleeps, and all of a sudden they've gone to pieces. The breathing starts to go to pot, and before you know it, they've convinced themselves they're not capable of doing it when they are. So the biggest thing that I would always suggest is one, listen to the test before you do it. Don't make the mistake of just turning up on the day, especially if you've got a little bit of anxiety around it. Make sure that you put a little bit of prep in and listen to the beeps. Get yourself used to them and remove the anxiety around them. The other big thing is that everyone thinks that the bleep test is actually, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's absolutely, the voice is horrible. Um, the issue around the bleep test is that people think that it's actually testing your cardiovascular, and it is to some extent. But what it's also testing is your ability to turn. The turns inside the bleep test are probably the thing that stop the momentum of your run. How often were you? I'll tell you now. I've done quite a few foot chases in my career, and not once have I ever done a foot chase for a shuttle and then turned back on myself and had to pivot back round. If it is, it's a bit of a comedy sketch. Um, so for me, it's a very unrealistic test that we probably shouldn't be using as a measure of a person's fitness to do the police. However, it's there, so we've got to deal with it. But what I would definitely suggest doing is doing some movements around turning. So the pivot is really important when you do the bleep test. So what you want to be able to do is arrive on the line and pivot off your back foot so you can bounce off rather than coming to a stop and then you've got to start getting your momentum back up. You want to bounce off to keep the momentum going. That's a huge thing. The problem that you've got is that you've got to do that, you've got to set it up outside and you've got to be able to do it. So that's a bit of a problem. So the other solution to the problem is that you could go and do it on a treadmill. The only caveat to that is that you don't get the pivots. But what you can do is you can build up your. We've got people, for example, that do it on the treadmill, but they listen to the bleeps in the mind in their earphones. They're not doing the bleep test; they're just listening to the bleeps to get the bleeps them used to doing it. And you can do it very simply by going doing 4K, 6K, 8K, 10K, and then 12, and then coming back down. And we have people that do that. And what it simulates is that it gets quicker each time. You do it on a flat. We had some people say, "Shall I do it on incline?" I was like, "Well, no, because you're not running on incline on bleep test. Just simulate it as best you can." But the big thing, I would work on your agility on your pivot. I'd certainly give yourself enough time to do it, and I'd be listening to the bleeps in your head. And I'd also now I don't know what it's like when you're initially joining, but certainly a lot of forces now are doing whereby you can request to do it. For example, you can request to do it with one of the trainers by yourself. Because one of the other things that a lot of people struggle with is like standing next to people. Because we're putting that peer pressure on each other. And then we get into the habit of we'll follow the quickest person, and that can be the worst thing in the world because they're going too quick. And that's why the practice is really important. Yeah,
Mm.
and you're right, mate. That is another thing whereby you can start to, you know, get inside your own head very quickly. And the reality is that that test is more than passable, by the way. It really is. But I get really annoyed when people try and put people down because they'll go, "Oh, it's easy." No, no, that's like me saying to you, saying, "But well, 100 meters is easy." Well, I can promise you, I can get nowhere near the speed that he could get. Everybody has got different things that they struggle with, and for a lot of people, it's definitely the pivots are huge and the mental block with it. But give yourself enough time. Like for example, in the side our 1-to-1, we've got Graham, who's one of the country's leads instructors for the bleep test, because it's such a huge problem. It doesn't matter how fit you are, how strong you are. what really matters is can you deal with the mental aspect of that test? And if you can, you'll pass it. If you can't, it'll be a struggle, no matter how fit you are. So I would certainly focus on those three areas. Listening to the bleeps to get that used to that. Give yourself enough time. Focus on the pivots and get that foot placement right so you can bounce off. And make sure that you try and simulate that test in some way. Hopefully that
Yeah,
helps.